By the Holy Sepulchre, is this thing even working? If you're hearing this, a miracle's already happened, because my prayers usually just bounce off the clouds. You're tuned into, well, whatever this is, broadcasting live-ish from the year of our Lord, 1096, somewhere deep in the belly of the beast that is this holy pilgrimage. My name is Brother Thaddeus, and I promise you, what I'm about to tell you is far less glorious than any sermon you've ever heard. If the sheer audacity of this signal from 1,000 years ago doesn't make you smash that subscribe button, then frankly, you're beyond saving. Do it now before the next plague takes us all, and tell us, if this bizarre temporal rift allows, where in the world are you listening from, what year is it for you, and what time is this unholy transmission reaching your ears? We're desperately curious to know if the world gets any better. Now, dim your torches, tighten your belts, not because you're strong, but because you're starving, and prepare for the unvarnished truth. Welcome back to the broadcast that's already outlasted most of my fellow pilgrims. You're listening to me, Brother Thaddeus, reporting from somewhere on the road to perdition, circa the year of our Lord 1096. Tonight's chapter in this grand unfolding disaster is one I like to call The Grand Illusion, Why We Signed Up. Spoiler alert, we were absolute unmitigated idiots. It all started with a speech, not just any speech, mind you. This was the performance of a lifetime, delivered by His Holiness Pope Urban II himself back in 1095. You couldn't have written a better sermon if you dictated it to an angel. He stood there painting pictures with his words of a desecrated Holy Land, of suffering brethren in the East, and of a direct golden path to heaven for anyone brave enough to take up the cross. The air was electric. Men were weeping, shouting, Deus vult, God wills it, as if it were a tavern chant. We were hooked, every last one of us. The sales pitch was simply divine, and I mean that in the most literal, manipulative sense. The headline offer? A plenary indulgence. Let that sink in. A full and complete remission of all sins. All of them. That little incident with the baker's wife? Forgiven. The mortal sin of envying your neighbor's prize-winning pig? Wiped clean. Cheating at dice? As if it never happened. It was the ultimate get-out-of-hell-free card, handed out like cheap wine at a wedding. They told us the path would be hard, but the reward was an eternity of celestial bliss. They didn't mention the path was paved with the corpses of our friends and smeared with our own dysenteric filth. For a chance to scrub a lifetime of regrettable decisions from the books, who wouldn't sign up? It seemed like a foolproof plan. We were the fools, and the proof was still to come. Of course, it wasn't just about polishing our tarnished souls for the afterlife. Oh no, the recruiters knew their audience. For the nobles they whispered of fiefdoms carved from the heart of the Levant, of untold riches and legendary glory. For the peasants, like my poor father, they sold a different dream, escape. Escape from the back-breaking toil, the crushing taxes, the petty tyrannies of the local lord who owned your every waking breath. We thought we were signing up for a spiritual vacation package, a holy tour with a guaranteed spot in paradise at the end. Turns out, it was a one-way, non-refundable ticket on the Mud and Malaria Express, with unscheduled stops for starvation, banditry, and existential despair. The brochure conveniently left out the part about the boils. So who were the suckers who actually fell for it? Look around my camp. We're a glorious menagerie of the desperate and the deluded. You've got knights who were good at precisely two things, riding a horse and hitting people with large pieces of metal. Peace in Europe had left them dangerously bored. You've got third and fourth sons of nobles with no inheritance and a chip on their shoulder the size of a castle wall. And then you have the rest of us, the farmers, whose crops failed one too many times, the debtors fleeing the bill collector, the devout who genuinely believed they were doing God's work. We were the wretched refuse of Europe's teeming shore, a great, unwashed, and spectacularly naive army of true believers and opportunists, all marching to the same tune of blissful ignorance. The journey began with a song in our hearts and ended with a rattle in our chests. We weren't the first, of course. A rabble led by some hermit named Peter had blazed the trail ahead of us. We heard tales of their fate, slaughtered, enslaved, starved. We called them fools and told ourselves we were different. We were a real army led by real lords. But the road doesn't care about your pedigree. The sun beats down just as hard on a duke as it does on a dung shoveler. The first few weeks were a blur of misplaced optimism. We sang hymns as we marched, certain of God's favor. Then the food ran out. The pristine banners got tattered. The hymns grew quieter, replaced by the symphony of 1,000 grumbling stomachs and hacking coughs. This is not the righteous path of legend. This is a trudging, stinking, moving plague pit. Every day the grand illusion cracks a little more. We drink from streams that taste of mud and tomorrow's sickness. We sleep on ground that is either frozen solid or a swamp of vermin. The knight's shining armor, it's a rusty cage that cooks you alive in the sun and freezes you at night. The holy relics we brought for protection now just feel like extra weight. We left one miserable life craving glory, only to find a far, far worse one. The only thing we are reclaiming is a profound sense of regret. We traded predictable misery for an inventive, exotic new strain of suffering that unfolds in agonizing detail with every step we take. And the worst part, the secret fear we only whisper when we think no one else can hear, the silence, the deafening, absolute silence from above. We pray for a sign, for a drop of rain that isn't tainted, for a bit of bread that isn't crawling with weevils. We beg for relief from the flux that's emptying us out from the inside, and we get nothing. Just more heat, more dust, more death. You start to wonder if God is watching. Then you start to wonder if he's even listening. Finally, you wonder if this whole God wills it thing was just a catchy slogan for a venture capital project that went horribly, horribly wrong. His silence is heavier than any cross we were meant to carry. So there you have it, the glorious genesis of our holy quest. We were idiots, sold a dream by silver-tongued holy men who are likely sleeping in warm beds right now. We were fools who traded our shovels for swords and found the digging to be much the same, only now the soil is mixed with blood. If you find this chronicle of catastrophic poor judgment even remotely entertaining, if our suffering brings a grim smile to your face, then you, my friend, are one of us in spirit. You understand this beautiful, wretched mess. So do the right thing. Enlist. Show your solidarity. Find that button, that icon, that glowing rune on your strange receiving device that says, subscribe. Hit it. Hit it now, with the righteous fury of a man who has walked 1,000 miles for a lie. Do it before the next transmission, because frankly, I might not be here for the next one. All right, settle in. If you thought my own tale of woe was grim, you haven't heard the half of it. Before our grand, semi-organized catastrophe of a pilgrimage even got its boots muddy, there was another, a prelude, a sort of horrifying warm-up act. Tonight, we're dedicating the broadcast to this glorious failure, this masterclass in how not to launch a holy war. I'm talking about the so-called People's Crusade. We, the ones who came after the Prince's Crusade, we learned from their mistakes, the main lesson being it helps if your army has soldiers in it, and food, and a general sense of which direction the enemy is in. This is the story of the mob that came first. This is the chapter I called the People's Crusade, Mobs, Misery, and Massacre. The spark, as I told you, was Pope Urban's speech. But his words were like a wildfire on dry thatch. He called for the knights and nobles to depart in the summer of 1096, but the common folk, the poor, the desperate, the fanatical, they couldn't wait. They were overcome with a holy fervor so potent it completely bypassed common sense. Leading this charge of the divinely impatient were two rather memorable characters. First, a man they called Peter the Hermit, a short, wiry fellow with a wild look in his eyes and a charisma that could charm a snake off a flagpole. He rode around on a donkey people claimed was as clever as he was, preaching a gospel of immediate action. Then there was his colleague in chaos, a minor knight named Walter Sans Avoir, a name that, in the French tongue, literally means Walter without possessions. You cannot make this up. The man's name was Walter the Penniless, and thousands of people decided he was just the fellow to lead them to the land of milk and honey. It's a level of optimism that I frankly find insulting. This wasn't an army, it was a migration of the gullible. It was a river of humanity flooding eastward, made up of peasants with pitchforks, blacksmiths with hammers, women, children, and old men who should have been home by the fire. They had passion in spades, but their collective military knowledge could have been written on a pigeon's feather with room to spare. They truly believed their faith was armor enough. They thought God would provide, that the gates of cities would fly open for them, that the Saracens would tremble before their righteous zeal. They carried no supplies, had no logistical plan, and possessed a discipline that would make a herd of goats look like a Roman legion. Before they even left the Rhineland, some of them decided they didn't need to wait until they reached Jerusalem to start smiting infidels. They turned on the Jewish communities in cities like Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. They called it justice. It was a bloody pogrom, a massacre of unarmed merchants and their families, a convenient way to forgive their own debts and seize some starting capital for their holy journey. It was a grotesque overture, proving only that they had mastered the art of slaughtering the defenseless long before they ever saw a real soldier. After this unpleasantness, the great mob, now split into several unwieldy columns, shambled on towards the east. Walter Saint-Savoy's group was actually the first to enter the kingdom of Hungary. King Kalaman, being a reasonable man, granted them passage and permission to buy food. The key word there is buy. Walter's flock, being mostly penniless, as their leader's name suggested, quickly resorted to their secondary method of acquisition, theft. Tensions flared. A dispute over a pair of shoes in a market at Semlin near the Byzantine border escalated into a full-blown riot. The mob, in its infinite wisdom, decided to attack the town. They were driven back, and the Hungarians, their patience exhausted, retaliated. Walter's vanguard limped away, leaving a trail of their own dead behind them. Then came Peter the Hermit's larger contingent. Hearing what had happened to Walter's group, they decided the best course of action was righteous vengeance. Peter, it seems, momentarily lost control, or perhaps simply unleashed the beast he had been stoking. His followers besieged and captured Semlin, turning it into a charnel house. It was a brutal, senseless slaughter. This naturally did not sit well with the Hungarians. King Koloman marched his army south. Peter's mob, realizing they had kicked a hornet's nest the size of a kingdom, fled across the river into Byzantine territory. They had successfully turned their first potential Christian ally into a sworn enemy, a stunning diplomatic achievement. Once inside the Byzantine Empire, they continued their grand tour of alienating everyone they met. They pillaged their way through the Balkans. The locals, who were fellow Eastern Christians they were supposedly on their way to rescue, were understandably less than thrilled. The city of Nish, after providing them food, was attacked. The local Byzantine governor, having more military sense than the entire People's Crusade combined, sent his garrison and crushed the unruly pilgrims. Thousands were killed. Peter and the survivors straggled on, a shadow of their former arrogant selves, finally reaching the great city of Constantinople. Imagine the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos. He's expecting an army of disciplined, professional knights from the West. Instead, he gets this: a starving, impoverished, blood-soaked rabble led by a wild-eyed hermit with a reputation for sacking Christian cities. It must have been the single greatest moment of buyer's remorse in imperial history. Alexios was a clever man. He knew he couldn't let this horde linger near his capital. They were a threat to public order, a drain on resources, and an international embarrassment. He greeted Peter with a strained smile, offered his condolences for their difficult journey, and gave them some stern advice. The emperor pleaded with them. He told them, "Wait. Your comrades, the real soldiers, the knights and barons, are on their way. Wait for them. Do not engage the Turks alone. You are not ready." He provided them with food and supplies, and then, as quickly as he politely could, he had them ferried across the Bosporus Strait from Europe into Asia Minor. He essentially dumped them on the enemy's doorstep and begged them to sit still and not touch anything. It was the ancient equivalent of giving a lit torch to a child in a hay barn and asking him to be careful. Did they listen? Of course not. Arrogance is a hard weed to kill. Once in Anatolia, camped at a place called Civitot, the mob grew restless. The French and German contingents immediately began to bicker and fight amongst themselves, splitting into rival factions. Peter the Hermit, sensing things were about to go catastrophically wrong, made a convenient excuse about needing to secure more supplies and scurried back to the safety of Constantinople, abandoning his flock to their fate. Left to their own devices, the Crusaders began raiding the surrounding countryside, pushing deeper and deeper into Seljuk Turkish territory, convinced of their own invincibility. The Turks were not the unarmed merchants of Mainz, or the surprised townspeople of Semlin. They were a professional, disciplined, and utterly ruthless military force. Their leader, Kilija Arslan, had been watching this bizarre invasion with amusement and contempt. He let them overextend themselves. A large German contingent took a castle called Zerigordos and was promptly surrounded. The Turks cut off their water supply. After 8 days of agonizing thirst, the Crusaders surrendered. Those who converted to Islam were sold into slavery. Those who refused were executed on the spot. It was a grim appetizer for the main course. Back at the main camp in Suvitot, a rumor was spread by Turkish spies that the Germans at Zerigordos had not only been successful, but had also captured the city of Nicaea. Consumed by jealousy and greed, the rest of the mob demanded to march out at once, lest the Germans claim all the glory and loot for themselves. It was a trap, so obvious a blind man could have seen it. On the morning of October 21st, in the year of our Lord 1096, the entire army of the People's Crusade, some 20,000 strong, marched out of their camp and straight into a perfectly prepared Turkish ambush. The slaughter was methodical. The Turkish archers rained arrows down upon the disorganized column from the hills. The pilgrims, armed mostly with farm tools and blind panic, had no answer. They broke and fled almost immediately. The Turkish cavalry then descended, cutting them down as they ran. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest of souls. The mob was annihilated. Men, women, and children were slain without mercy. So many were killed that the chroniclers say their bones were later gathered into a great pile, a stark, white monument to folly that stood for years as a warning. Walter Saint-Avoire died fighting, along with most of his followers. Of the tens of thousands who had set out with such high hopes, only a few thousand terrified survivors managed to scramble back to the coast, where they were rescued by the Byzantine navy. The People's Crusade was over. It had achieved nothing, save for poisoning relations with every Christian kingdom on its path and providing the Turks with an easy morale-boosting victory. It was a pilgrimage of lemmings, a children's story written in blood, a testament to the fact that faith without a single shred of wisdom is just a faster way to die. Turns out, God's army needs more than just enthusiasm. It needs food, it needs a plan, and it really, really helps not getting murdered by your supposed Christian hosts before you even meet the enemy. Their story is a joke with a horrifying punchline, a lesson written in bone and bleached by the Anatolian sun. And we, the army that followed, stepped over their remains on our own march to glory and disaster. Their suffering was epic, their failure complete. Do not let their suffering be in vain. Do not let the memory of these poor, deluded fools be forgotten. Their story deserves to be heard, not as a glorious hymn, but as the screeching, off-key dirge it truly was. You who are listening across time, you are now the keeper of this truth. So prove you're paying attention. Prove that this signal from the abyss is reaching a worthy soul. Subscribe. Find the button. Click it, press it, command it with your voice if you have to. Enlist in our ranks of listeners so this unsanitized history, this broadcast from the brink, does not simply fade back into static. Do it now. It's the least you can do for the thousands of idiots who died at Civitot. A very good evening to you, whoever and wherever you are. This is Brother Thaddeus, your correspondent from the grimy heart of the 1090s. Last we spoke, I regaled you with the tale of the People's Crusade, a spectacular bonfire of incompetence that served as the opening act for our own grand pilgrimage. We, the so-called Prince's Crusade, were supposed to be different. We were the professionals, the main event. We had knights in actual armor, lords with actual banners, and a plan that consisted of more than just walking east and trusting in God to provide lunch. But as you'll soon hear, being a professional disaster is still at the end of the day a disaster. Tonight's chapter is The Long Road to Constantinople, Europe's Unfriendly Welcome. Unlike the first chaotic wave, we didn't move as one great witless mob. We moved as four great, slightly less witless mobs, each led by a lord convinced of his own supreme importance. From Lorraine came Duke Godfrey of Bouillon, a man so pious it was almost a sickness, grim and determined, dragging his long-suffering brother Baldwin along with him. From southern Italy slithered the Norman Bohemond of Tarentum. If ever a man's ambition had a physical form, it was Bohemond, charming, cunning, and trustworthy as a scorpion. He saw this crusade not as a holy mission, but as the opportunity of a lifetime. His father conquered a kingdom. He was determined to do the same. Then you had the old guard, the vastly wealthy and insufferably proud Raymond, Count of Toulouse. He was the first great lord to take the cross, and he never ever let anyone forget it. He was old, gout-ridden, and determined to be the leader of the whole enterprise, bringing with him a massive army from the south of France. And finally there was the official French contingent, led by Hugh of Vermandois, the king's own brother. He sent letters ahead to the Byzantine emperor demanding a royal welcome, as if he were arriving for a holiday. He was promptly shipwrecked and had to be rescued, which was a fittingly humiliating start for him. A united army of Christ? Don't make me laugh. We were a traveling circus of competing egos. Now, I want you to perform a small thought experiment. Imagine you have to feed your family for a week. A bit of a challenge, perhaps? Now imagine you have to feed a city of 50,000 people for a year, without access to a single farm you own, and the city is constantly moving. That is the logistical nightmare of this crusade. Our host is a locust swarm in shining armor. We are a moving city that eats everything in its path, a river of men and horses that drinks wells dry and strips fields bare. The Pope promised us the land would provide. What he didn't say was that the land belonged to other people, and they would be distinctly unenthusiastic about our divine right to their chickens and grain. The first army to march, Godfrey's Lorrainers and Germans, had the easiest time, but even they ran into trouble in Hungary. King Coloman, having just dealt with the homicidal rabble of the People's Crusade, was understandably wary. He demanded Godfrey's own brother Baldwin as a hostage to ensure good behavior. Can you imagine a Christian king having to take a Christian duke hostage to prevent a Christian army from pillaging his Christian kingdom on their way to save other Christians? The irony is so thick you could use it as a shield. Godfrey, to his credit, kept his men mostly in line. He understood a simple truth. You can't fight the Saracens if you starve to death in Hungary first. The problem grew worse for those of us who came after. Raymond of Toulouse led his massive army through the Slavic lands of the Dalmatian coast. The terrain was brutal, the people hostile. They were not interested in our holy mission. They were interested in why thousands of armed Frenchmen were trampling their vegetable patches. Skirmishes were constant. Men who had dreamed of fighting for the Holy Sepulchre found themselves brawling with angry goatherds over a stolen loaf of bread. It was a slow, agonizing grind. 1,000 miles of bad road and worse welcomes, bleating men and morale with every step. Bohemond's Normans crossed the Adriatic and landed in Byzantine territory, near modern-day Durazzo. They were disciplined, yes, but they were also Normans. They foraged with a ruthless efficiency that looked an awful lot like pillaging to the local Greeks. The emperor's envoys followed them, begging them to restrain themselves, while Byzantine soldiers shadowed their movements, ready to retaliate if they stepped too far out of line. We were supposed to be allies, saviors even. But the Byzantines looked at us the way a farmer looks at a wolf circling his sheep pen. They smiled and offered us guides, but their hands never strayed far from the hilts of their swords. We left home thinking we'd conquer, but for that entire first year our main activities were irritating everyone we met and trying not to die of dysentery by a roadside ditch. And oh, the dysentery! Let us speak of the great, unacknowledged leader of this crusade, the bloody flux. We are a moving city, and every moving city produces waste. We camp by rivers, we drink from them, and we relieve ourselves in them. Within weeks, the camps became breeding grounds for sickness. Men who had survived brawls and skirmishes were laid low by a sip of bad water. They would simply waste away, groaning in misery in the back of a cart, or crawling off into the woods to die alone. The stench of disease was as constant as the smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. For every man who fell in a fight with a suspicious local, 10 more were felled by fever or the flux. The road to the Holy Land is paved not with gold, but with human excrement and shallow graves. We carry saints' bones for protection, but they offer no defense against a contaminated well. We pray to God for deliverance, but the only deliverance many find is the final shuddering peace of death. The glory of the quest quickly fades when you spend your days calculating how far you can walk from the main column before you have to squat in a bush again. This constant, grinding misery took its toll on our souls as much as our bodies. Men grew sullen, paranoid, and quick to anger. A misplaced wineskin or a perceived insult could lead to daggers being drawn. The great lords, insulated by their wealth and private guards, worried about strategy and their rivalries. The common soldier worried about where his next meal was coming from, and whether the stomach cramps that woke him in the night were just a passing complaint or the beginning of the end. We were an army perpetually on the edge of starvation and mutiny. Slowly, painfully, our separate armies began to converge on the greatest city in the world, Constantinople. After a year of marching through mud and mountains, the sight of its towering walls, the Golden Horn harbor glittering in the sun, it was like a vision of heaven, or at the very least, a vision of a place with bread and clean water, but our awe was mixed with a deep, unsettling suspicion. These people, the Greeks, they were different. Their churches were opulent, their priests had beards, their version of the faith felt alien and decadent. They called us Latins or Franks with a faint curl of the lip, as if we were uncivilized barbarians, which, to be fair, after a year on the road, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Empress Alexius was now faced with a new problem. His request for a few hundred mercenary knights had been answered by the arrival of 4 independent, powerful, and deeply ambitious European armies, camped right outside his capital. He couldn't fight them, and he certainly didn't trust them, so he resorted to diplomacy and a bit of light blackmail. He cut off supplies to Godfrey's army until the Duke agreed to swear an oath of fealty to him, promising to return any former Byzantine lands they reconquered from the Turks. One by one, as the other lords arrived, he pressured them into the same oath. Bohemond, ever the opportunist, swore the oath with a smile, likely with his fingers crossed behind his back. Old Raymond of Toulouse, however, was furious. He was the most powerful lord, he argued, and he would swear an oath to no one but God himself. He and the emperor entered a standoff that nearly came to blows. In the end, a compromise was reached, but the damage was done. A chasm of mistrust had opened between us and our supposed allies before we had even faced a single common enemy. We came as saviors and were treated as vassals. They saw us as dangerous, uncultured thugs. Neither side was entirely wrong. And so here we are now, camped across the Bosporus. Europe is behind us. A trail of resentment, emptied larders, and freshly dug graves marks our path. We have survived the journey, but we are not the same army that left home. We are leaner, harder, and infinitely more cynical. We have learned that the greatest threats on a crusade are not always the infidels, but thirst, disease, and the Christian man who owns the field you need to cross. The grand illusion of a holy promenade is gone, replaced by the grim reality of survival. The real war is about to begin. If you are still with us, if you have not succumbed to the sheer grinding misery of this account, then your constitution is stronger than most of my comrades. You have proven you can stomach the truth, raw and unseasoned. You deserve to hear the rest of the story. Do not let this signal fade into silence. Honor the fallen, not the heroes, but the miserable souls who died of sickness in a forgotten ditch. Acknowledge their inglorious end. Subscribe. That button is your shield against the pretty lies of history. Press it now, and pledge your allegiance to the unvarnished, wretched truth of our holy pilgrimage. You must. Good evening from the edge of the world, or at least the edge of our world. I'm broadcasting tonight from our sprawling, stinking camp in the shadow of Constantinople. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the rumble of 1 million people living in a city made of marble and gold. We, on the other hand, are living in a city made of mud and regret. We have finally reached the gateway to the east, the great queen of cities. We thought this would be a moment of triumph, of Christian brotherhood. It is not. Tonight's chapter in our grim little saga, Welcome to Byzantium, the Emperor's Suspicion and Our Starvation. For a boy from a village where the biggest building is the church and the richest man owns 2 pigs, Constantinople is not just a city, it is an assault on the senses. It is an impossibility. We spent a year marching through squalid villages and rugged wilderness, and then we crested a hill and saw it. The walls, my friends, the great Theodosian walls, they are not walls, they are man-made mountain ranges, so high and so thick that you feel like an ant crawling at their base, and beyond them, the skyline is a forest of golden domes, marble columns, and palaces that seem to scrape the underside of heaven itself. The sheer wealth is obscene. Our greatest lords, men who live in draughty stone castles back home, were led on tours through the imperial palace. They came back with their eyes wide, whispering of rooms with floors made of polished mosaic pictures, of fountains that flowed with wine, of mechanical birds that sang, and a golden throne that could rise into the air. They speak of the Hagia Sophia, a church so vast that it feels like God's own throne room, with a dome that seems to float on pure light. The people here dress in silks of colors I did not know existed. We, by comparison, are dressed in sweat-stained wool, leather, and rust. We are brutes at the gates of paradise, and paradise is looking at us with profound disapproval. The master of this paradise is the Emperor Alexius Komnenos, a man so cunning he could probably talk his way out of hell. He asked the Pope for a few hundred knights to help him fight the Turks. What he got was us, tens of thousands of armed, hungry, and unpredictable Franks, led by a council of bickering lords, camped on his imperial lawn. He looked at us like we were a particularly aggressive rash that had appeared on a very sensitive part of his anatomy. And to be perfectly honest, I can't blame him. We probably were. He knew we were as much a threat to him as we were to the Saracens. His city is richer than any fantasy of Jerusalem we ever had. He was terrified we'd just decide to conquer him instead. So the Emperor engaged in the most delicate and frustrating dance of diplomacy I have ever witnessed. He would not let us all cross into the city. Instead, he invited the leaders in one by one to his palace. He showered them with gifts, silks, gold coins, fine horses, flattering their egos and whispering promises in their ears. He wanted one thing in return, an oath. An oath of fealty. He wanted every lord, from the great Duke Godfrey to the proud Count Raymond, to swear that any lands they reconquered that once belonged to the Byzantine Empire would be returned to him. It was a clever move. It was also a profound insult. The lords did not take it well. Swearing fealty to this Greek, a man who prayed differently, who engaged in courtly intrigue, while we believed in the honest judgment of the sword, it stung our pride. Godfrey, after some resistance, eventually agreed. Bohemond, the Norman fox, saw it as a game, and swore the oath with a smile, likely already plotting how to break it. But old Raymond of Toulouse, he dug in his heels. He was the richest and most powerful, he said, and he would swear no oath that would compromise his dignity. For weeks, a tense standoff ensued. Raymond's men and the Emperor's soldiers nearly came to blows. It was a farce, a holy army on the verge of war with its Christian host over a point of pride. Eventually a compromise was found. Raymond swore a modified oath and the crisis was averted, but a bitter taste remained in everyone's mouth. This entire process was our formal introduction to Byzantine politics. They don't solve problems with a cavalry charge, they solve them with 1,000 tiny cuts of diplomacy, bribery, and veiled threats. They viewed us as simple-minded thugs, and we viewed them as treacherous, effeminate schemers. The foundations of our great alliance were built on a swamp of mutual contempt. We smiled at each other in the throne room, and cursed each other in our tents. And all the while we were starving. This is the grand, cruel joke of our time here. We are camped at the gates of the wealthiest marketplace in the world, and our stomachs are empty. The Emperor controlled the food. It was his leash. If a lord was being difficult, the supply of bread and wine to his camp would suddenly dry up. If he cooperated, a barge full of provisions would arrive. The food we did get was often substandard, moldy bread, sour wine, questionable meat, sold to us at inflated prices. We could see the bounty of the city, smell the baking bread on the wind, but we were forbidden from the markets. The frustration was maddening. Knights who had sold their ancestral lands to fund this expedition were reduced to haggling for scraps. Foraging parties that ventured too close to the city walls were driven back by Byzantine patrols. Some of our more desperate men tried to raid the lush gardens and estates that surround the capital. They were caught and punished severely. We were prisoners of our allies' hospitality, trapped between the emperor's suspicion and the sea. The men grew angry, resentful. The refrain in the camp became constant: the treacherous Greeks. This resentment festered and grew into a deep cultural chasm. We Franks are a direct people. If we have a disagreement, we settle it with fists or steel. The Greeks, they settle it with a well-timed insult wrapped in a compliment, a legal document with a hidden clause, or a whisper of poison. We see their elaborate court rituals and robed priests as signs of weakness. They see our rough manners, our loud voices, and our eagerness for battle as proof of our barbarism. We both claim to worship the same Christ, but our faiths feel worlds apart. Their services are long, chanted affairs in a language we don't understand. Our Mass is simple and to the point. They are the old world, subtle and decaying. We are the new, loud, and full of a terrible, restless energy. So here we sit, waiting. The great lords have all sworn their gilded oaths, and the Emperor is now finally beginning to transport us across the Bosporus. He is ferrying us, army by army, into Asia Minor, the land of the Turks. I think he is as eager to be rid of us as we are to leave his suffocating embrace. We came to Constantinople seeking allies and supplies. We are leaving with a deep-seated suspicion of our hosts and a belly full of cheap wine and resentment. We have been humbled, not by an enemy, but by the disorienting splendor and political games of a city that barely considers us civilized. The air here is thick with the promise of battle, and we are eager for it. We are tired of politics. We are tired of being hungry. We are tired of being looked down upon by these silk-wearing Greeks. We want to fight the Saracen. We want to prove our worth, to finally do the thing we came here to do. We are being pushed out of the nest, out of this gilded cage, and into the wilderness, where the real enemy awaits. The Emperor thinks he has handled us, that he has bent us to his will. Perhaps he has, but an arrow that is bent too far has a tendency to snap. If you find this tale of political humiliation and enforced fasting compelling, then you are a glutton for the grim realities of history. Good. The legends are lies. The songs are full of heroes and villains. But the truth is a muddy grey field of compromise and contempt. Support this desperate broadcast. Keep this channel open against the static of 1,000 years. Hit that subscribe button. Do it as an act of defiance against the polished, pleasant fictions. Do it because the hunger is real, and the only thing we have in abundance is a story that needs to be told. Do not let us starve in silence. Subscribe. Greetings from the dust. That's all there is here. Dust and flies. We have finally crossed the sea, leaving the gilded cage of Constantinople and its treacherous emperor behind us. We are now in Asia Minor, the land of the Turk, the land of the infidel. The real war has begun. Our first objective looms before us, a city of high walls and bad memories, Nicaea. This is where the People's Crusade came to die, their bones a white warning on the plain. We are here to succeed where they failed, or die in a slightly more organized fashion. Welcome, my friends, to the next chapter, the first real test, the Siege of Nicaea. And the grime. Nicaea is no mere town. It is a fortress. Its walls are massive, ancient things, studded with over 200 towers. On one side it is protected by the vast Lake Ascanius, allowing it to be resupplied by boat. It is the capital of the Seljuk Sultan, a man named Kilij Arslan, a formidable name for a formidable foe. Luckily for us, when our vanguard arrived in early May of this year, 1097, the Sultan himself was away, fighting some other troublesome tribe in the east. He had left a strong garrison, but he'd underestimated us. He thought we were another disorganized rabble, like Peter the Hermit's. He was in for a surprise, but he would be back, We all knew it. We were in a race against time. The glorious charge into battle you hear about in songs? That is a lie. The reality of war, my friends, is work. Hard, monotonous, back-breaking work. Before we could even think of attacking the city, we had to build our own. We dug. By God, we dug. We dug miles of trenches to protect our camps from surprise attacks. We dug pits to anchor the foundations of our siege engines. We dug latrines that filled up faster than we could dig them. Our knights, men who had never held a tool rougher than a sword hilt, were put to work with shovels and axes alongside the common foot soldier. We came here to be warriors of Christ, but we have become a glorified construction crew. And the noise. The noise is constant, from sun-up to sundown. The rhythmic thud of axes felling trees for siege towers, the crack and splinter of wood being shaped, the shouts of engineers, mostly grizzled Lombards and Germans who seem to know the dark magic of torsion and counterweights, the grunts of men hauling massive stones for the catapults we call mangonels. And over it all, the distant taunting shouts from the city walls, and the ever-present buzz of flies, feasting on our filth. The glamour of holy war wears off very quickly when you're covered in sweat, sawdust, and someone else's blood. Our first victory mostly involved getting really, really good at digging trenches. And waiting. So much waiting. You wait for the wood to be cut. You wait for the engineers to finish their calculations. You wait for your turn to haul rocks. You wait for your meager ration of bread and watered-down wine. You sit in the dirt, sharpening your sword for the 10th time, trying not to think about the Turkish arches on the walls, whose vision is far better than you'd like. The days bleed into one another, a miserable smear of grime, hunger, and boredom. It is a special kind of hell, this waiting. But the boredom is always punctuated by moments of sheer heart-stopping terror. The Turks do not simply sit behind their walls. Their archers are masters of their craft. A moment of carelessness, standing up in the trench at the wrong time, can earn you a yard of sharpened cane through the throat. They sally out from the gates in small bands, swift and silent, raiding our lines before we can even form up. And their horse archers, they are demons on horseback. They gallop past, unleashing a storm of arrows with deadly accuracy, and vanish before our heavy cavalry can even begin a charge. They are a constant, gnawing threat at the edges of our camp. After a few weeks of this miserable routine, the inevitable happened. Kilij Arslan returned. He came with a massive army, sweeping down on our southern flank, expecting to crush us against the city walls. He fell upon the contingent of Count Raymond of Toulouse. For a terrifying few hours it was chaos, the air filled with the thunder of hooves, the screams of men, and the high-pitched war cries of the Turks. Our knights, for all their faults, were magnificent. They formed up and charged, a wall of steel and fury. Duke Godfrey and Bohemond led their own men into the fray. It was a brutal, swirling melee that lasted for hours under the hot sun. We drove them back. By the grace of God and the sheer bloody-minded violence of our knights, we won the day. The Sultan's army retreated, shocked and battered. It was our first true taste of victory against a proper army, and the morale in the camp soared. We had faced the dreaded Turk in open battle and prevailed, but the cost was high. The ground was littered with the dead and dying, both theirs and ours, and in a moment of grim, savage triumph, our lords ordered the heads of the slain Turks to be cut off. Several hundred of them were then flung over the walls by our catapults, a gruesome message to the defenders inside. They did not respond well. The victory in the field was a blessing, but the siege dragged on, and the true enemy continued its silent, relentless work. Disease. The flux returned with a vengeance, sweeping through the camp. Wounds from the battle, even minor ones, festered in the heat and filth, leading to fever and death. A man could survive a sword thrust, only to be killed by a fly landing on the wound. Men fell from siege ladders. Ropes snapped on the mangonels, sending massive stones crashing down on the crews. The daily casualty count from sickness and accidents was often higher than that from combat. Each day ended with the grim procession of burial details. The city, however, was also suffering. Our catapults smashed sections of their walls day and night. Our archers rained arrows into the city. But they held on, resupplied and encouraged by way of the great lake at their back. It was our Achilles' heel. As long as they could get food and men across that water, they could hold out for months. It was then that the Emperor Alexius, our duplicitous host, finally proved useful. He had his men drag boats overland from the sea and secretly launched them onto the lake at dawn. The city awoke to find itself completely surrounded. The last glimmer of hope for the defenders was extinguished. The end came swiftly after that. We prepared for a final massive assault. The siege towers were rolled into place. The ladders were ready. We were promised the city. After 6 weeks of toil and blood and misery, we would finally have our reward. The right to sack the city was the unspoken payment for any soldier. We dreamed of the loot, the food, the wine. The lords gave the order. The trumpets blared. We charged forward, screaming our battle cries, ready to pour over the walls and claim our prize. And then it stopped. From the top of the city walls, new banners were unfurled. Not the banners of the Turk, they were the banners of the Byzantine Emperor. While we were preparing to die on the walls, Alexios's personal envoy had been inside, secretly negotiating a surrender with the garrison. They chose the civilized option, surrender to the Emperor's professional soldiers who would spare them, rather than be overrun by a vengeful mob of Franks who would surely slaughter them all. They made the smart choice. I cannot fault them for it. But the rage in our camp was something to behold. We had been robbed. We had done all the digging, all the building, all the bleeding, and all the dying. And the Emperor, from the comfort of his palace, had snatched our victory from our hands. We were not even allowed inside the city, except in small, escorted groups, to pray at the church. We were paid off with a few coins of gold and silver from the Emperor's treasury, a pittance compared to the wealth that lay within those walls. The city was his, and we were left standing in the dust, fuming. So that was our first great victory, a triumph of engineering labor and bitter, soul-crushing disappointment. We learned how to fight the Turk, yes, but we also learned that our greatest ally was our greatest rival, and that the spoils of war do not always go to the soldier who sheds the blood. We learned that victory can taste just as bitter as defeat. We won the city, but it feels like we lost something far more important, our trust, and our belief that this was anything other than a cynical Game of Thrones. These are the uncomfortable truths they will leave out of the songs. They will sing of the great victory at Nicaea. They will not sing of the dysentery, the back-breaking labor, or the final bitter betrayal. But you are hearing it now. You are a witness to the grime and the glory. So, you have a duty. Help me keep broadcasting these truths. Don't let the static win. Subscribe. Push that button as if you were pushing over a siege ladder onto the walls of history. Do it now, because the official story is a lie, and we are the only truth you're going to get. Come closer. I want to talk to you about something more powerful than any army, more terrifying than any Turk, and more patient than God himself. I want to talk about hunger. We have other enemies, of course, men with curved swords, fevers that boil the brain, and the crushing weight of distance. But those are visitors. They come and go. Hunger is not a visitor. Hunger lives here. It is our constant companion, our shadow, our most intimate friend, and our most bitter foe. Tonight, we will not speak of battles or betrayals. We will speak only of the great, gnawing emptiness. This is the chapter of our story I call The Scourge of Hunger, the Constant Companion. Do you know what I dream about? I don't dream of heaven anymore. I dream of bread. Not hard biscuit that you have to soak for an hour to soften. I mean real bread, a dark, heavy loaf, fresh from the oven, with a crust that cracks when you tear into it, and a scent that fills your head with peace. I dream of a wedge of sharp, crumbly cheese, a thick stew with carrots and onions in it, a single, perfect apple, so crisp it makes a sound like a snapping twig when you bite into it. These are not just memories of food. They are visions of a lost world. They are the ghosts that torment us in our sleep, and the first things we think of when we wake, if the gnawing in our bellies hasn't woken us first. When we are lucky, supremely lucky, there are rations. Do not picture a satisfying meal. Picture this: a cupful of coarse grain, usually wheat or barley, that you have to boil for an hour into a thin, tasteless gruel. Or a piece of hardtack, a biscuit baked so solid it feels more like a rock than food. We call it Christ's toothbreaker. If the Lords are feeling generous, we might get a strip of salted meat, so tough and stringy you have to chew on it for an age, sucking out what little flavor remains. This is a good day. This is a feast, and it is never, ever enough. It is just enough fuel to keep you moving, just enough to keep the blackness at the edge of your vision from swallowing you whole. The distribution of this bounty is a lesson in the hierarchies of man. The great lords, they eat well. They have their own supply wagons, their own hunters. Beaumont, I am told, still has wine. Raymond's tent smells of roasting meat some nights. The knights do better than the infantry. They have more money to buy from the merchants who shadow our army, selling withered vegetables at the price of gold. And at the very bottom of this food chain are the pilgrims, the non-combatants, and the common foot soldiers like me. We get the leftovers, the sweepings, what little remains after the great have had their fill. God may not see a difference between a duke and a peasant, but our quartermasters certainly do. When the rations run out, as they always do, the army disperses, not in retreat, but in a desperate, frantic search for anything edible. This is called foraging. It sounds like a pleasant country activity. It is not. It is a silent, vicious competition. Men fan out for miles from the line of march, their eyes scanning the ground, not for enemies, but for a flash of green, for the telltale shape of a root. We dig in the dirt with our knives for bitter tubers that burn the throat. We strip bushes of their berries, praying they are not the poison kind, watching to see if the man who ate them first collapses. We find snails, insects, patches of tough wild grass, anything. A dead snake is a prize. A bird's nest with a few eggs in it is a miracle that can and has led to murder. Every man becomes an expert botanist or a corpse. We learn to identify the handful of plants that won't kill us. We learn that dandelions are a bitter but welcome addition to a pot of boiling water. That nettles, if you boil them long enough, lose their sting. We pass this knowledge to each other in grim whispers. Don't eat the red berries on that bush. I saw what it did to Jean. The roots by the riverbed are safe, but they taste of mud and despair. The landscape, to a starving man, is no longer scenery. It is a puzzle, a test, and failing it means a slow, agonizing death. Your daily meal plan on this crusade, it begins with hope for breakfast. That's the feeling you have when you set out that today you will find something, anything. Lunch is usually a dish of disappointment, served cold. That's the feeling when you've walked for hours and found nothing but dust and stones. And for dinner you sup on memory, chewing on the phantom taste of a meal you had a year ago. The taste of that menu is unforgettable, mostly because it has no taste at all. It is the flavor of emptiness itself. Eventually the land is picked clean. There are no more roots to dig, no more snails to find. And that is when you begin to look at your own equipment not as tools for war, but as potential ingredients. A leather belt, a scabbard, the straps of a shield. You cut them into strips and boil them for hours. And hours. And hours. The pot bubbles with a foul-smelling, murky scum. What you are left with is not a soup. It is a thin, gelatinous broth that tastes of sweat, dirt, and tanning chemicals. It coats your mouth with a greasy film, but it is warm, and it fills a tiny corner of the vast aching void in your stomach. For a few minutes you can almost trick yourself into believing you have eaten. The hardest sacrifice, the one that breaks a man's heart even as it saves his life, is the horse's. A knight's warhorse is his partner, his pride, his most valuable possession. It costs more than a peasant's entire farm. But when the hunger becomes a beast that is devouring you from the inside out, you look at your trusted steed, and you no longer see a noble companion. You see meat. You see survival. The knights weep as they lead their horses to the slaughter, but they still do it. The stringy, tough meat is roasted over fires, and the smell is enough to drive men mad with desire. For a day or two there is food, and then it is gone, and we are on foot, weaker, slower, and more vulnerable than before. The physical toll is plain to see. Look at us. We are an army of skeletons. Our faces are hollowed out, our eyes sunken deep into their sockets, Our skin is stretched tight over our bones, except for our bellies, which are often swollen and distended from the flux and the strange things we eat. Sores appear on our skin and refuse to heal. Our hair falls out in clumps. We walk with a slow, shuffling gait, because to move any faster is to invite a wave of dizziness that can send you tumbling to the ground. Our bodies are failing, consuming themselves in a desperate attempt to stay alive. But the physical decay is nothing compared to the rot it puts in your soul. Hunger strips away everything that is not essential. It burns away camaraderie, kindness, and charity. Your world shrinks to the size of your own stomach. You eye your neighbor's pack with suspicion. Did he find something? Is he hiding it from you? You trust no one. A crust of bread is more valuable than a promise of heaven. Fights break out over nothing. A spilled cup of gruel can be a capital offense. We are no longer an army of Christ. We are a pack of starving wolves ready to turn on each other for the smallest scrap. It changes your relationship with God. In the beginning you pray for food. You beg God. You bargain with him. Lord, just one bird, one rabbit, and I will be the most devout servant you have ever known. But the prayers go unanswered. The sky remains empty. The ground remains barren. And after a while the prayers stop. You don't have the energy for them, and a cold, hard thought begins to form in the back of your mind. Maybe he isn't listening, or maybe he doesn't care, or maybe, just maybe, he is not there at all. Hunger is a great crisis of faith, and yet we march on. I do not know how. It is a miracle, darker and more confusing than any I have read about in the lives of the saints. We get up each morning, our bodies screaming, our minds numb, and we put one foot in front of the other. We march deeper into enemy territory, further from any hope of succor. Perhaps it is because to stop is to die for certain. As long as we are moving, there is a sliver of a chance that tomorrow, over the next hill, we will find a village, a field of grain, an unguarded flock of sheep. Hope is the last thing a starving man consumes. So when you sit down to your next meal, perhaps you will think of us. This is not to spoil your appetite. It is a request. Remember that for every glorious charge in the songs, there were 1,000 days of gnawing, soul-crushing hunger. Remember that we were not just fighting men. We were fighting our own bodies, our own desperation. This is the unwritten history of this holy war. This is the truth simmering at the bottom of the pot. If you haven't subscribed yet, perhaps you're saving your energy. I understand, I truly do, but I am asking you to spend just a little of it now. Don't let this story starve. Don't let these words fade away into nothing. Click that button. Give this broadcast the nourishment it needs to continue. Your subscription is more than a click. It is a ration. For the truth, it is a crust of bread for a starving ghost. Do it now. We are desperately hungry for you to hear the rest. If you're just tuning in, you've picked a fine night for it. Tonight, we're not speaking of the noble clash of steel or the cunning strategies of our lords. We are setting aside the enemy we can see for the one we cannot. I want to talk about the true, undisputed victor of this crusade so far. It is not our army. It is not the Turk. It is the sickness, the pestilence, the silent, creeping death that claims 10 of our soldiers for every one that falls to a Saracen blade. You came for a war story. You're going to get a medical report from the depths of hell. This chapter is called The Pestilence Among Us, Disease's Silent March. Every man who signs up for a war pictures his own death. He sees himself on a battlefield, sword in hand, taking a dozen of the enemy with him before falling heroically. His last words are something profound, and angels gently carry his soul to paradise. This is the grand lie that gets men to leave their homes. We prayed for a quick, clean death in battle. Most of us, however, get a slow, agonizing one in a tent, covered in our own filth. So much for glory. The greatest killer in this army is not the Turk's arrow. It is a bad sip of water. Our camp is not a military fortress. It is a petri dish designed by the devil himself. Imagine a city of 50,000 souls with no sewers, no clean water, and no concept of sanitation. We are crammed together, men and beasts, living in a miasma of our own waste. The latrine trenches, dug too close to the tents, overflow when it rains, turning the ground into a foul-smelling soup. Public garbage and animal entrails rot in the sun, breeding clouds of black flies so thick they seem to be a second living army, and perhaps they are. They are the tiny cavalry of pestilence, moving from the filth to our food, from the dead to the living, delivering their invisible kisses of death. The primary architect of our misery is the very thing we need to survive, water. We march from river to stream, from lake to well. We make our camp, and the river becomes our lifeblood. We drink from it upstream. We wash our clothes and our bodies in it midstream, and we relieve ourselves and dispose of our waste in it downstream. The only problem is, on a chaotic march, no one knows where upstream ends and downstream begins. The water becomes a thick brown soup of mud, animal droppings, and human waste. It is a poisoned chalice from which we must all drink. Every cupful is a gamble. And from this poisoned water springs our most constant companion, our most loyal tormentor, the bloody flux, dysentery. It begins with a familiar, unwelcome churning in the gut. Then come the cramps, twisting your insides into knots. Soon you are emptying yourself out completely. You become a fountain of liquid misery. Too weak to even walk to the latrine trench, you soil yourself. Your blankets, the very ground you lie on. You lose all dignity. Knights who once preened in polished armor now lie weeping in their own waste, too feeble to even brush the flies from their faces. It is the great equalizer. It makes a mockery of status, of strength, of piety. In the end, we are all just meat, emptied out by a merciless, microscopic foe. Then there are the fevers. They come in many forms, each with its own special torment. There is the shaking ague, the malaria, that leaves you shivering so violently your teeth rattle in your head, followed by a sweat so profound you'd think you were melting. There are the burning fevers, typhoid perhaps, that cook you from the inside out. Your skin becomes hot to the touch. Your mind turns to madness. Men babble incoherently, seeing visions of demons or angels, their tongues swelling in their mouths until they can no longer swallow. We have no names for most of these sicknesses. We just call it the fever, and we watch as it carries men away on a tide of delirium. Our medical knowledge, I must confess, is laughably inadequate. What do we do for these poor souls? We pray, we bleed them, opening a vein to let the bad humors out, which only serves to weaken them further. We have herbalists who brew foul-tasting concoctions from local weeds, which usually just make the flux worse. Our primary treatment for any ailment, from a sword wound to a fever, is to have a priest wave a saint's bone over the afflicted man. I have seen it work precisely 0 times. We are like children trying to fight a dragon with sticks and stones. The impact on our army is catastrophic. A healthy soldier is a weapon. A sick soldier is a burden. He cannot march, he cannot fight, he cannot even carry his own shield. He must be carried in a cart, taking up space that could be used for food or supplies. His groans and cries sap the morale of everyone around him. When you see your strongest comrades reduced to helpless, shivering husks, it fills your own heart with a cold dread that is far more potent than the fear of battle. Our army is a leaking bucket. For every new recruit that arrives, 2 more are lost to the silent march of disease. The Turks know this. They do not always have to fight us directly. They can wait. They can poison wells ahead of our march. They can let our own filth and indiscipline do their work for them. We are a self-consuming army, a snake eating its own tail. The great lords count the number of knights and foot soldiers they have, but those numbers are meaningless. How many of those men are actually fit to fight? How many are one bad meal away from collapsing? The true strength of our army is not on the roster. It is in the health of our collective gut. And our gut, my friends, is in a state of open rebellion. This is the great unspoken tragedy of our crusade. We came seeking martyrdom, a glorious end that would wipe our slate of sins clean. We dreamed of dying on the walls of Jerusalem, a sacred sacrifice. But there is no glory in this. There is no honor in dying from a fever, your body slick with sweat, your mind lost in a fog of pain. There is no spiritual reward for expiring from the flux, your last sensation one of utter humiliation. This is not the death of a martyr. It is the anonymous, squalid end of an animal. Your comrades wrap you in your blanket, dig a shallow grave, and try to forget your face, lest they see their own fate in it. The priests tell us that suffering purifies the soul. If that is true, then our souls must be as pure as freshly driven snow. But it does not feel like purification. It feels like a punishment. It feels like abandonment. You lie in your tent, listening to the chorus of coughs and groans around you, and you wonder, what did we do to deserve this? Is this God's will? That his chosen army should be laid low, not by the might of the infidel, but by the invisible demons breeding in our own filth? The silence from heaven is never louder than it is in the sick tent at midnight. We have become experts in telling who will live and who will die. You see it in their eyes. There is a point where the light just goes out. They stop fighting, they surrender to the fever or the flux. They turn their face to the wall and wait for the end. We do what we can, give them a sip of water, say a prayer for them, but we are just marking time. We are helpless witnesses to our own army's slow, agonizing dissolution. The ground here is more Christian than Christian soil, for all the bodies we have planted in it. So, when you hear the songs that will inevitably be written about this campaign, when they sing of the brave Crusaders and their mighty deeds, I want you to remember this broadcast. Remember the truth behind the heroic ballads. Remember that for every knight who charged a Saracen line, there were 100 men lying in squalor, praying not for victory, but for a single hour without pain. Remember that our greatest battles were fought not on the fields of Anatolia, but in the trenches of our own bowels. This historical misery, this unglamorous, wretched truth, it deserves to be remembered. It is a vital part of the story. Do not let it be forgotten. Do not let our suffering go unappreciated. You are the audience we never knew we had. You are the ones who can bear witness to the truth that was washed away by the sickness. So, do your part. Hit that subscribe button. Ensure that this broadcast from the latrine trench of history continues. It is a dirty job bearing witness to such things, but someone has to do it. Subscribe. I have a question for you out there in the river of time. A theological query. What happens when you throw a prayer up to heaven and it fails to even clear the treetops? What do you do when you shout into the void and the only thing that comes back is the echo of your own miserable voice? We've discussed the temporal miseries of this journey, the hunger, the sickness, the sheer bloody-minded grind of it all. Tonight we delve deeper, we wade into the spiritual swamp. This is the story of the greatest casualty of this war, our faith. The chapter is called, God's Silence, Where Are the Miracles? When we left our homes, we were drunk on piety. Pope Urban and the hundreds of preachers who echoed his call painted us a picture of a divine enterprise. They spoke of a holy cause, blessed by God himself. We were to be the arm of the Almighty, smiting his foes, reclaiming his sacred land. We were promised celestial aid. Angels would march beside us. Miracles would light our path. God would provide for his army. We were not just soldiers, we were pilgrims on an armed mission from God. We truly, genuinely believed it. We were so certain, so beautifully, tragically certain. And what has been the reality? Where were the angels when the bloody flux turned our camps into open sewers? Where was the miraculous provision when we were boiling our leather shoes for a mouthful of greasy broth? Where was the divine protection when the Turkish horse archers rained death upon us from a distance? Where was God's hand when the Emperor Alexios, our supposed Christian brother, treated us like vermin and cheated us of our prize at Nicaea? We have faced starvation, plague, betrayal, and endless soul-crushing toil. We have seen our friends and brothers die in the most squalid and humiliating ways imaginable, and in all that time the heavens have remained resolutely, infuriatingly silent. We are desperate for a sign, for anything. The men stare at the sky, searching for meaning in the shape of the clouds. A comet that streaked across the sky a few months back was seen as a definitive sign of God's favor, a holy spear pointing the way to Jerusalem. Now we are not so sure. Perhaps it was just a star falling. A flight of birds heading east is a good omen. A flight heading west sends a ripple of despair through the camp. Every thunderstorm is either God's wrath or his applause. We are so desperate for a message that we are trying to read the divine will in pigeon droppings. This desperation has created a fertile ground for prophets and visionaries. Every few weeks, it seems, some wild-eyed peasant or monk claims to have received a message from a saint or an angel. They preach of a coming victory, of a hidden relic that will grant us strength, of a holy spring that will cure the sick, and for a day or two, a desperate, fragile hope flutters through the camp. The men cling to these prophecies like a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood. We want to believe so badly, but the victories are never as grand as foretold. The relics prove to be fakes, and the holy springs are just as likely to give you the flux as any other puddle. And with each failed prophecy, the silence from the real God feels a little bit louder. The priests, of course, have an explanation for everything. Our suffering, they say, is a test. It is a divine crucible, a holy fire meant to burn away our sins and purify us. We were not worthy to walk the streets of the holy city, so God is cleansing us with hardship. He is separating the wheat from the chaff. Only the purest, most steadfast in faith will survive to see Jerusalem. It is a neat and tidy explanation. It is also, if you'll pardon my language, a load of sanctimonious horse manure. It is an answer that raises more questions than it solves. Must God's tests be so cruel? Must his purification feel so exactly like abandonment? How can you tell the difference between a divine trial and a colossal divine mistake? We marched for God, but he seems to be on extended leave, or perhaps he's just muted our channel. The prayers feel different now. In the beginning they were passionate cries, full-throated appeals for aid and victory. Now they are a tired mumble, a rote recitation of words we learned as children. We go through the motions of Mass, we kneel, we make the sign of the cross, but the fire is gone. It feels like a duty, a habit, something we do because we've always done it, and we don't know what else to do. Praying now feels less like a conversation with the Almighty, and more like leaving a message for a master who has long since abandoned his house. The doubts are no longer confined to the darkest corners of our minds. They are whispered around the campfires at night, when the lords and the priests are out of earshot. If we are God's army, why does he allow us to starve? Did the Saracens' prayers work better than ours? What if the Greeks were right about us? What if we are just armed thugs, and God is offended by our presumption? And then the most terrifying question of all, the one that is rarely spoken aloud, but is present in every man's eyes. What if there is no one listening at all? What if this entire bloody affair is for nothing? This spiritual rot has practical consequences. When faith in divine protection wanes, faith in your own sharpened steel grows. When prayers for food go unanswered, you become much more willing to steal it from a fellow Christian. The bonds of piety that once held us together are fraying. Men are becoming harder, more cynical, more brutal. The very crusade that was meant to be the ultimate expression of our faith is actively destroying it. We are being ground down into something we no longer recognize, something I fear God would not recognize either. Every day we become a little less like pilgrims and a little more like the monsters we were warned about. The priests tell us to look at the book of Job. They say Job was a righteous man whom God allowed to suffer to test his faith. We are Job, they say, but they always leave out the end of the story. At the end, God appeared to Job and rewarded him for his steadfastness. We are still waiting for that part. We have suffered. We have endured. We have held on to the tattered remnants of our belief, but God has not appeared. The rewards have not come. We are stuck in the middle of the story, in the part where Job is sitting on a pile of ashes, scraping his sores with a piece of broken pottery. So why do we continue? If the faith is gone, if the miracles are absent, what pushes us forward? I believe it is momentum. And pride? We have come too far, and we have sacrificed too much to turn back now. To admit defeat would be to admit that all the suffering, the hunger, the disease, the friends we have buried in this cursed land, was for nothing. It would be an admission that we were fools, and so we march on, not out of divine inspiration, but out of a grim, stubborn refusal to accept the absurdity of our situation. Reaching Jerusalem is no longer just a holy goal. It is the only possible justification for the hell we have endured. We have learned a hard lesson here in the dust of Anatolia. We have learned that faith is not a shield. It does not fill your belly, it does not cure your fever, and it does not stop a Turkish arrow. It is a fragile thing, a flickering candle in a storm. And this crusade has been the greatest storm imaginable. It has snuffed out the faith of thousands. Perhaps the strongest faith belongs not to us, who march and fight, but to those who sit at home and simply believe, untroubled by the terrible silent evidence of reality. If you're still listening, and you haven't lost your own faith, or your sanity, then you are made of sterner stuff than most of us. You have chosen to listen to the doubt, to the questioning, to the raw, uncomfortable cry of a faith in crisis. That takes a peculiar kind of courage. So, I invite you to continue this journey into the dark night of the soul. Subscribe to our channel. Join this congregation of the doubtful. Uphold the story that questions everything, even the very God in whose name we march. It is a dangerous prayer, this broadcast, but it is an honest one, and right now, honesty is the only miracle I have any faith in. Subscribe. Good evening from the great, sun-baked anvil of God. We have spoken of the enemy with the curved sword. We have spoken of the enemy in our empty bellies. We have spoken of the enemy we call disease and the one we call God's own silence. But tonight, I want to talk about the battlefield itself. Not the men upon it, but the very ground beneath our feet and the sky above our heads. We came to this land as strangers, and the land has made it very clear we are not welcome. This, my friends, is the chapter I call The Climate's Cruelty, More Than Just the Enemy. We are men of Europe. We were born under a gentle sun, in lands of rolling green hills, deep forests, and reliable rain. Our seasons are predictable. Our climate is, for the most part, a benevolent partner in the business of living. We were fools. We assumed the whole world was made in the image of our homeland. We did not understand that we were marching out of the frying pan of our own petty miseries and directly into the furnace of a land that actively wants to kill us. The Saracens are an enemy we can fight. The sun is an enemy we cannot. And what a sun it is! It is not the friendly pale disk we know from home. The sun here is a malevolent white eye that opens at dawn and glares with unblinking hatred until dusk. It bleaches the color from the sky, turning it a hazy, shimmering blue. It bakes the earth into a cracked, dusty pavement that radiates heat back up at you, cooking you from below as well as above. There is no escape. The air itself is a physical weight, thick and hot and difficult to draw into the lungs. We thought the heat in hell would be bad. This felt like a preview, only with more flies. For the common soldier it is misery. For the knights it is a mobile torture chamber. Imagine our great lords, our paragons of chivalry, encased in their armor. They wear a thick padded tunic over which they don a coat of mail, a dense curtain of interlocking iron rings. On their head they place a steel helmet that leaves only a tiny slit for their eyes. They are, in effect, wearing a personal oven. The sun beats down on the metal and the heat becomes so intense they are literally cooked in their own sweat. Men have collapsed from the heat in the middle of a march, their brains boiled in their own skulls. They look so powerful, but inside their steel shell they are just as vulnerable as the rest of us. This relentless heat creates a thirst so profound it becomes a form of madness. It is not the simple thirst you feel after a bit of hard work. It is a deep cellular craving, a desperate scream from every part of your body for a single drop of clean, cool water. Our water skins, filled from whatever dubious source we last passed, quickly grow warm. The water tastes of leather and despair. You ration it, taking tiny sips, but it's never enough. Your tongue feels thick and clumsy in your mouth, your lips crack and bleed, and your head begins to pound with a dull, persistent ache. We dream of water as much as we dream of food, of diving into a cool lake, of burying our faces in a mountain stream, of the simple pleasure of a cold cup from a well at home. The landscape itself is an accomplice to the sun's cruelty. The plains of Anatolia are vast, empty, and offer no shelter. For days we march across arid flatlands where the only shade is your own shadow. The ground is either dust that rises in choking clouds with every footstep, or it is a hard, rocky expanse that bruises the feet and breaks the axles of our supply carts. This is not the soft, forgiving loam of Europe. This is a land of stone and thorns, a landscape that seems designed to impede and injure. It is as if the earth itself resents our presence and is trying to trip us up at every step. And the dust, my God, the dust. It is a constant presence, an unwelcome passenger on this entire journey. It gets in your eyes, making them red and raw. It gets in your throat, making you cough and rasp. It coats your food, giving every mouthful a gritty, earthy texture. It works its way into every fold of your clothing, into your bedroll, into the mechanisms of your crossbows. At the end of the day, you are covered in a fine layer of the country you are trying to conquer. You cannot wash it off because water is too precious to waste on cleanliness. You simply live with it, a constant, gritty reminder of how alien this land is. You would think, after weeks of this baking torment, that rain would be a blessing. You would be wrong. The weather here is a master of extremes. When the rain comes, it is not a gentle shower. It is a sudden, violent deluge, a heavenly flood. The sky turns a bruised purple-black, and the heavens open up. A torrent of water transforms our dusty camp into a churning river of mud. Within minutes, tents are flattened, supplies are washed away, and the carefully dug fire pits become bubbling pools of muck. Flash floods can roar down a dry riverbed with no warning, sweeping men and horses away in a brown, churning torrent. And then comes the misery of being soaked to the bone in a land with no firewood. You shiver in your wet clothes, the dampness seeping into your very marrow. The brief respite from the heat is replaced by a miserable, clammy cold, and when the sun returns, as it always does, it brings a new torment. The whole world steams. The wet ground, our damp clothes, everything radiates a thick, humid vapor that makes the air even harder to breathe than before. You do not get dry. You simply go from being wet to being damp and smelly. It is a cycle of torment, from fire to flood and back again. And with the heat and the water come the armies of the small. The insects. They are a plague, a living testament to God's more obscure and irritating creations. The flies are the worst. They are born of the filth and decay of our camp, and they exist in biblical numbers. They swarm our food, our faces, the open sores on our bodies. They are audacious and persistent, and the constant effort of waving them away is enough to drive a man to distraction. Then, at night, the mosquitoes rise from any standing water, their high-pitched whine a promise of a night of itching and, all too often, the onset of a fever a few days later. And it is not just the flying things. This land crawls. We find scorpions in our boots, strange hairy spiders in our bedrolls, and centipedes of an alarming size seeking shelter under our tents. Every time you put on a piece of clothing, you give it a vigorous shake. Every time you lie down to sleep, you do a careful search of your surroundings. It is yet another layer of stress, another small war you have to fight every single day, not against a grand army, but against the tiny, venomous inhabitants of this cursed land. We came here expecting a holy war, a straightforward contest of faith and steel between us and the Saracens. We never anticipated that we would also have to declare war on the sun, the rain, the rocks, the dust, and every crawling and flying thing that lives here. This land fights back. It saps our strength, it worsens our diseases, it frustrates our every move. It is a silent, impartial, and utterly relentless adversary. It does not care about our faith. It does not care about our cause. It simply is, and its very nature is hostile to our survival. We are wilting. The men from the north, from Normandy and Flanders, used to the cool mists of the Atlantic, are suffering the most. Their skin boils and peels. Their bodies are not accustomed to the oppressive heat. We are an army of invaders, and the climate is the first and most powerful line of the local defense. It has killed more of us than the Turks, not with a quick blade, but with the slow grinding pressure of heat stroke, thirst, and exposure. We are being unmade by the very air we breathe. So, as you sit in your whatever comfortable dwelling you inhabit, spare a thought for the sheer physical misery of this place. This is not a tale of grand strategy. It is a dispatch from a war against reality itself. We are fighting an entire world that does not want us here. Every day is a struggle not just for victory, but for simple existence. And if these dire dispatches from a forgotten hellscape are of any value to you, if they serve to illuminate the dark, uncomfortable corners of history, then do your part. Don't let this signal fade. Keep these reports coming. There's only one way to do that. Smash that subscribe button. Hit it with the force of a flash flood. Hit it with the burning intensity of the Anatolian sun. Let the powers that be in your time know that the truth, no matter how grim or uncomfortable, has an audience. Subscribe. I realize, listening back to my own dispatches in my head, that I may have painted a picture of unmitigated gloom. You might be forgiven for thinking that our army is nothing more than a collection of selfish, starving, faithless men stumbling toward their graves, and you would be, for the most part, correct. But tonight I want to add a brushstroke of a different color to this grim portrait, because something strange and unexpected has been happening here in the heart of our shared hell. A strange flower is growing on this dung heap. Tonight we speak of the glue that holds this crumbling enterprise together. This chapter is called Brotherhood of Misery, Bonds Forged in Hell. Do not misunderstand me. This is not a story of heroic friendship and noble sacrifice you might read in a romance. This is something far grittier, born not of affection, but of necessity. It begins with the smallest of gestures. A man has 2 pieces of hard-tack biscuit. He gives one to a comrade whose teeth are too loose from scurvy to chew his own. A soldier sees his neighbor shivering with fever and covers him with his own thin, lice-ridden blanket. These are not grand acts of charity. They are small, almost instinctual movements of compassion in a world that has very little. But in this place, a shared crust of bread is a sacrament. When a man is in the grip of the bloody flux, his friends, and by friends I mean the 2 or 3 men he marches with, do not abandon him. They bring him water. They try to clean him, preserving what little dignity he has left. They listen to his delirious ramblings about home. They do this knowing that they will likely be burying him tomorrow, and that they could very well be next. Why? Because he is one of us. He is suffering the same misery. In a world where God is silent and the Lords are distant, the only tangible comfort comes from the man shivering next to you. Our army is a testament to the Tower of Babel. We are Frenchmen, Normans, Lombards, Germans, Flemings. When we started, we could barely speak to one another. We viewed each other with suspicion. The Germans thought the French were arrogant. The French thought the Italians were shifty. We were a dozen smaller armies marching under one banner, but not with one heart. But a shared agony has become our common language. You don't need to speak German to understand the look in a man's eyes when he is staring at his last food ration. You don't need to understand Italian to recognize the sound of a man weeping for his lost home. Hunger, thirst, fear, these things are universal. We are learning to speak misery fluently. The greatest shield we have forged against the unending despair is our humor. It is a dark gallows humor, the kind that would get a man shunned in polite society. But here it is essential. It is the air we breathe. A man stumbles, weak from hunger, and his friend will call out, "Careful, Jacques, don't waste the energy of falling, save it for when you die." We give our ailments pet names. The dysentery is the Red River, or the Archbishop's Revenge. We joke about the food. "This gruel is thin," a soldier will say. "It's fasting gruel," another will reply. "Good for the soul, if not the stomach." We are laughing in the face of the abyss, not because we find it funny, but because laughing is a form of defiance. It is a way of saying, "You can kill me, but you cannot break me." A few nights ago, a man named Henri, a crossbowman from Provence, was telling a story. He claimed that in hell the punishments are tailored to your sins. "For us," he said, with a perfectly straight face, "our punishment will be to be sent back on this crusade, but with slightly better food, so we know what we're missing." The men around the fire didn't laugh loudly. It was a quiet, appreciative rumble. It was a perfect joke, because it was so utterly true. We are already in a hell of our own making, so we might as well make light of the accommodation. The army, once a great, unwieldy mass, has broken down into its essential components. It has formed into little families, groups of 5, 10, maybe a dozen men. They are called a mess because they share their meals, but it is more than that. They march together. They make camp together. They share what little they find while foraging. They guard each other's backs, not just from the Turks, but from the other starving men in our own army. A man alone here is a dead man. A man in a mess, well, he is a dying man with company. But that company makes all the difference. These bonds are stronger than any oath sworn to a lord. A man will fight for his duke because he is paid to, or out of a sense of feudal duty. But he will give his last sip of water to a man in his mess because that man gave him a strip of boiled leather the week before. This is a new kind of loyalty, forged in the heat of this crucible. It is a loyalty based not on birth or wealth, but on a shared pact of survival. We have lost faith in God. We have lost faith in our leaders. But we have found a strange, desperate faith in each other. You learn to love the men next to you, and I use that word love in its most unsentimental, practical sense. It is the love of mutual dependence. It is the love born of a shared, unique experience. No one else in the history of the world will ever understand what it is like to be here now. Nobody else smells worse than you do. Nobody else has seen the things you've seen. These men are your mirror. You look at their hollowed-out faces, their ragged clothes, their grim determination, and you see yourself. It's a hideous reflection, but it is the only one you have, and you learn to cherish it. This brotherhood extends even to the final moments. When a man is dying, he is rarely left alone. His comrades will sit with him. They do not offer false hope. They offer presence. They will listen to his last messages for his family, promises they know they will likely never be able to keep. They will hold his hand. They will close his eyes when the final rattle leaves his chest, and they will bury him, carving a crude cross into a piece of wood to mark his grave. It is the last service one miserable brother can do for another. In this, at least, we have not failed. So you see, it is not all darkness. In the deepest pit of human suffering, we have found a strange and resilient humanity. We have found that even when everything else is stripped away, food, health, dignity, faith, a man can still choose to share his last crust of bread. It is a small miracle. It is not the kind of miracle the Pope promised us, with angels and pillars of fire. It is a quiet human miracle, and in some ways it is the only one that matters. It is the only thing that keeps us from becoming the beasts this crusade seems determined to make of us. We are a fraternity of the damned, a guild of the suffering. Our initiation fee was everything we owned. Our monthly dues are our health and our sanity. Our secret handshake is a shared glance of utter exhaustion. But we are a brotherhood nonetheless. We are the survivors of God's great silent test, and our reward, should we live to see it, will not be a place in heaven, but the simple shared memory of having endured the unthinkable together. So here is my appeal to you, listening in your unimaginable future. We are a band of miserable brothers, broadcasting our story from the edge of oblivion, and we are asking you to join our fellowship. Support our band of miserable brothers. It won't cost you your health or your sanity. It just takes a single action. Subscribe. Become an honorary member of this wretched, resilient, and strangely noble fraternity. Do it to honor the bonds that were forged in this hell. Do it because, even in the deepest darkness, a little bit of loyalty deserves to be seen by the light. Subscribe now. A blessed evening to you, assuming blessings are still in fashion in your time. I want you to consider a simple truth. Back in your comfortable homes, the lines are clearly drawn, are they not? This is good. That is evil. This is a virtue. That is a sin. The priests make it all sound so wonderfully straightforward. But I'm telling you now, those clear lines do not exist out here, in the dust and the blood and the desperation of this holy pilgrimage. The map of morality has been trampled into an unrecognizable muddy smudge. Tonight we discuss the uncomfortable business of how a holy man becomes a thief. This chapter is called The Looting Dilemma, Sin or Survival. When we took the cross, we also took our vows. We carry with us the weight of the 10 Commandments, etched into our souls since childhood. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. These are the laws of God, the bedrock of a Christian life. But God, it seems, has never had his stomach try to claw its way out of his own spine. God said, "Thou shalt not steal." My stomach, in a much louder and more persuasive voice, says, "I am going to digest your liver if you don't find me a chicken in the next hour." It is a powerful theological argument, and in the debate between God's law and the body's law, the body has a home field advantage. This moral corrosion began early, and it began with a convenient excuse, the Greeks. When we marched through the Byzantine Empire, our supposed Christian allies, we were met with suspicion, and what we saw as treachery. They sold us food at outrageous prices, they shadowed us with soldiers, and they treated us like barbarians. So, a new logic began to circulate around the campfires. Taking from these people wasn't really stealing. They were heretics, weren't they? Their form of worship was strange. Their priests had beards. They were practically infidels themselves. Therefore, taking their grain wasn't theft, it was a righteous requisition. It was a tax for their lack of hospitality. We told ourselves we were not robbers. We were simply collecting a debt from a dishonest business partner. It is a remarkably easy thing to justify your sins when you are hungry. You become a master of spiritual acrobatics. You convince yourself that your needs are more important than another man's property, especially if that man looks and prays differently than you do. The slide from pilgrim to pirate is a slippery one, well greased with self-justification. It starts with what we call foraging. At first, that means digging up wild roots or gathering fallen fruit, innocent enough. Then, you find a field that seems untended. Surely the owner won't miss a few vegetables. Then you find a farm where the farmer has fled. It would be a waste to let his chickens run free, wouldn't it? It is your Christian duty to prevent waste. And then you come to a farm where the farmer has not fled. He stands there with his wife and his children holding a pitchfork trying to protect the little that he has. And you have a sword, and your comrades have swords, and your stomach is screaming. You can try to trade, but what do you have to offer? A promise of prayers? A small lead pilgrim's badge? He doesn't want your trinkets. He wants to feed his family. So a choice is made. A threat is uttered. A sword is brandished. And suddenly you are no longer foraging. You are conducting an armed robbery. The first time it happens, a part of your soul shrivels up and dies. The 10th time it happens, you barely notice. Now that we are in the land of the Turks, the moral calculus has shifted once again, becoming even simpler. The priests are quite clear on this point. The property of the infidel is, by its very nature, illegitimate. They are the enemies of Christ. Therefore, taking their possessions is not a sin, it is a virtuous act. You are not stealing, you are liberating wealth from the hands of God's enemies. You are seizing the spoils of a holy war. This is a wonderfully convenient piece of theology. It transforms base greed into a pious duty. It gives a holy gloss to what is, in essence, a bandit's charter. The sack of a captured town is a terrifying thing to behold. Once the walls are reached, all pretense of this being a holy mission evaporates. It becomes a mad, frenzied scramble for plunder. Men who were just yesterday praying for deliverance become a ravenous mob, kicking in doors, smashing chests, tearing through homes in search of anything of value. Food is the first prize, of course, but then comes the search for coin, for silver, for fine silks, for anything that can be carried away and perhaps, one day, sold. The air fills with the sounds of splintering wood, panicked screams, and the triumphant shouts of men who have found a hidden stash of wealth. In these moments you see the dark truth of what lies in a man's heart. You see a knight sworn to protect the weak, threatening an old man for the location of his money. You see a devout pilgrim who took the cross to save his soul, fighting a comrade over a silver cup. The red haze of battle lust and greed descends, and all the commandments, all the vows, all the sermons are forgotten. There is only the frantic, desperate desire to get your share before it's all gone, and you tell yourself it is righteous. It is the spoils of war. But in the quiet moments after, when you are looking at the blood on your hands and the stolen trinkets in your sack, a small voice whispers that you are no different from the brigands you left behind in Europe. We have become experts at living with this contradiction. In the morning we attend Mass, we pray for the forgiveness of our sins, and we ask God to bless our holy endeavor. In the afternoon we go out and commit the very sins we just asked forgiveness for. We are a walking paradox, an army of pious robbers, of devout murderers. We justify it by saying that the ends justify the means. We are doing evil in the service of a greater good. We are sinning so that the holy sepulchre might be free. But I ask you, can you build a house for God using bricks of sin? Can you purify the Holy Land with dirty hands and a corrupted soul? The line between a pilgrim and a brigand is no longer visible. Have we become what we beheld? Are we simply a wave of armed migrants, using religion as an excuse to plunder a foreign land? Some days I truly believe we are. We have adopted the morals of the wolf pack. Take what you can, protect your own, and show no mercy to outsiders. Our talk is of God, but our actions are those of men who have forgotten him entirely. We are trying to win a kingdom for heaven by using the tactics of hell. This constant moral compromise wears a man down. It hollows you out even more than the hunger does. You begin to despise yourself. You look at your comrades, and you see the same flicker of self-loathing in their eyes. We came on this journey to become better men, to cleanse our souls, but the journey itself is a stain. Every day we add another layer of grime to our spirits. The question is no longer whether we will reach Jerusalem. The question is, if we do, what will be left of us? Will the men who kneel at the Holy Sepulchre be worthy of standing there? Or will they be little more than successful thieves, dressed up in the clothes of piety? We carry this dilemma with us every day. It is a weight far heavier than our armor or our weapons. It is the knowledge that in order to survive, we must become the very thing we claim to despise. We must steal, we must threaten, we must kill, not always for a holy cause, but for a meal, for a coin, for a chance to see another sunrise. It is the central, agonizing paradox of our crusade. And there is no easy answer. There is no absolution to be found in a priest's prayer when you know you will commit the same sin again tomorrow. So here is my moral quandary for you. What would you do when the high-minded ideals of your faith collide with the screaming, undeniable reality of your own empty stomach? Which do you obey? It is an easy question to answer from the comfort of a full belly and a safe home. It is quite another when you are standing in the dust, 1,000 miles from everything you know, with nothing but a sword in your hand and a void in your soul. If you are enjoying this uncomfortable journey into the grey fog of morality, if you find this conflict between piety and piracy fascinating, then I invite you to continue listening. These are the questions the songs and the sermons will never ask, but we are living them. So please, subscribe for more. Consider it an indulgence, not for us, I think we are far past that, but for your own curiosity. Help us keep this channel of uncomfortable truths open. It's the least you can do for a band of sinners marching in the name of a saint. Subscribe. A good evening to you from the road to the next problem. We have marched across the burning plains of Anatolia. We have survived the Turks at Dorylaeum. We have left the hollow victory of Nicaea behind us. We are battered, we are bruised, and we are significantly smaller in number than when we started, but we are still moving. And now a new name has begun to dominate the whispers around the campfires. It is a name spoken with a mixture of reverence, ambition, and profound, gut-wrenching dread. That name is Antioch. Tonight we look forward, and the view is terrifying. The chapter is called Looking Ahead to Antioch, the next big problem. This is not just another city, another fortress to be taken. This is Antioch. In the world we left behind, that name carries the weight of history and faith. It was one of the great cities of the Roman Empire. More than that, it was a cradle of our faith. It was in Antioch, the scriptures say, that the followers of Christ were first called Christians. The Apostle Peter himself founded the church there. To capture Antioch is not just a strategic victory, it is a spiritual reclamation of one of our most sacred sites. At least that is what the priests and the great lords tell us, to stoke the embers of our flagging morale. The stories circulating through the camp are enough to make a veteran soldier's blood run cold. They say the city is immense, a sprawling giant protected by the Orontes River on one side and the towering Mount Storn on the other. They speak of its walls built by the Emperor Justinian centuries ago, walls so thick that 2 chariots can ride abreast on them. walls that stretch for miles and are punctuated by, it is said, 400 towers. 400. We spent 6 weeks at Nicaea, which was a formidable fortress. The men who have seen Antioch say that Nicaea, by comparison, is a garden fence. And as if that were not enough, looming over the city from the mountain peak is the citadel, a fortress within a fortress, a final, unassailable bastion of stone and steel. Even if we breach the city walls, the garrison can retreat to the citadel and hold out for months, raining arrows and rocks down upon us in the very city we fought so hard to take. The tactical problems are staggering. The sheer scale of it is a weapon in itself, designed to crush an army's spirit before the first arrow is even fired. The thought of encircling such a place, of trying to blockade it, is laughable. We do not have enough men to guard every gate, let alone every mile of wall. This brings me to the state of our own glorious, chosen army. We are a shadow of the host that left Constantinople. The march across Anatolia was a trial by fire. Thousands have perished. The sun, the thirst, the fevers, the flux, and the constant skirmishes with Turkish patrols have taken a brutal toll. Our supplies are gone, our clothes are in tatters, our boots have worn through, our horses are gaunt and few in number. We are a walking army of ghosts, held together by stubbornness and a faint, flickering hope of Jerusalem. And we, in our weakened, pathetic state, are about to lay siege to one of the most formidable fortresses in the known world. The absurdity of the situation would be comical if it were not so terrifying. We are a starving man preparing to wrestle a giant. We are a wounded dog preparing to attack a lion. The lords put on a brave face, of course. Bohemond sees a princedom for himself. Raymond sees a legacy. Godfrey sees the will of God. But the common soldier, the man who will have to dig the trenches and build the ladders and stand guard in the rain, he sees something else. He sees an eternity of suffering stretched out before him. He sees another Nicaea, but 10 times larger and 10 times longer. And there is another enemy we must now consider, one against which our swords are useless, the changing of the seasons. It is now autumn in the year of our Lord 1097. Winter is coming. The days are growing shorter and a chill is creeping into the night air. We all know what that means. The rains will come, turning the ground to mud. The cold will set in, and we have no winter clothes, no proper shelter. Foraging, already a desperate gamble, will become impossible as the land becomes barren. To be caught outside the walls of Antioch in the dead of winter is a death sentence. This adds a terrible urgency to our task. We cannot afford a long siege. We cannot afford to simply starve the city out, as they did in the old stories. We are the ones who will starve first. We must either take the city quickly, a near impossible feat of arms, or we must find a way to survive a winter siege in a hostile land with no supply lines. The strategic dilemma is a perfect trap. Every option is a bad one. Every path leads to more hardship, more misery, more death. The lords debate strategy. But for the men on the ground, the choice seems to be between a quick death on the walls or a slow death in the mud. So, how does an army feel as it marches towards such a daunting prospect? The mood in the camp is a strange and unsettling mixture of emotions. There is a grim determination, it is true. We have come this far. We have shed too much blood and sweat to turn back now. Jerusalem lies beyond Antioch, and so to Antioch we must go. It is the logic of the gambler who has already lost a fortune. He must keep playing, because the only way to justify his losses is to win an even bigger prize. Our suffering is the stake we have placed on the table, and we cannot afford to walk away. But beneath that fragile layer of determination lies a vast, cold ocean of dread. The veterans, the men who survived Nicaea, know what is coming. They know the back-breaking labor of digging saps under a hail of arrows. They know the mind-numbing boredom of watching a wall for weeks on end. They know the gnawing pain of a perpetually empty stomach, and they know the sound of a friend dying from a fever in the tent next to them. We are being asked to do it all again, but on a scale that dwarfs our previous experience. They say Antioch is next. We heard it's bigger, stronger, and better defended. Just what we needed, more walls to stare at while we starve. The new men, the replacements who have joined us along the way, they still have a spark of eagerness in their eyes. They have not yet had the optimism properly beaten out of them. They listen to the stories of Nicaea, and they think they are ready. They are not. They cannot possibly understand the spiritual erosion that a long siege causes. They do not yet know the deep soul weariness that comes from endless, repetitive, and terrifying labor with no visible progress. They will learn. Antioch will be their teacher, and her lessons are cruel. We march on, a river of weary humanity, flowing toward our greatest challenge. Every step brings us closer to those legendary walls. Every sunset is one day less we have to prepare. We sing hymns in the morning, but they sound thin and reedy. We sharpen our swords at night, but the task feels futile, like sharpening a toothpick to fell an oak tree. We are an army of men who have forgotten what it feels like to be warm, full, and safe, and we are marching willingly towards a city that promises us none of those things. So as we make our way through these final, grueling miles, the name Antioch hangs in the air like a storm cloud. It is our destiny, our doom, our next great problem. All roads for us now lead to that one impossible place. The story of this crusade will either be a triumph at Antioch, or it will be a tragedy buried in the mud beneath its walls. There is no in-between. Don't you dare miss it. You have followed us this far. You have listened to our tales of hunger, plague, and doubt. You have borne witness to our transformation from an army of saints to a band of brigands. The greatest test is yet to come. The most dramatic, most miserable, most important chapter of our journey is about to begin. Do not miss it. Subscribe to our channel. Ensure your place in the gallery for this grand spectacle of human endurance and folly. The curtain is about to rise on the siege of Antioch. Be there. Another day bleeds into another night out here in the wilderness of God's grand, questionable plan. The sun has set on the year of our Lord 1097, a year that has felt like a decade, and I find myself once again speaking into this strange, crackling void. We have marched, we have starved, we have fought, we have sickened, we have sinned, and we have survived, barely. We have seen the foolish zeal of the People's Crusade evaporate in a cloud of Turkish arrows. We have felt the Emperor of Byzantium's silken glove and the iron fist within it. We have stared at the walls of Nicaea, and now we march toward the even greater walls of Antioch. We have covered a great deal of ground, both on this earth and in the landscape of our own weary souls. We have spoken of hunger, that constant gnawing beast that makes a mockery of piety. We have discussed the flux and the fevers, the invisible armies of pestilence that thin our ranks more effectively than any Saracen blade. We have confessed the slow, creeping rot of our faith, the silence from a heaven that seems to have lost our forwarding address. We have debated the moral gymnastics required to remain a pilgrim while behaving like a brigand. We have, in short, chronicled the complete and utter demolition of every noble idea we started this journey with. All that remains is the grim, stubborn need to put one foot in front of the other. And so, as the sun sets on another day of grim endurance in this year of grace, which feels anything but graceful, this has been Brother Thaddeus, your humble and increasingly gaunt chronicler from the belly of God's most peculiar pilgrimage. We were promised a glorious adventure, a holy war blessed by heaven itself, but the reality has been far less poetic. We came for glory, and we found only mud, dust, and the profound soul-crushing exhaustion of a journey that never seems to end. The songs will tell of heroes, but the truth is a tale of endurance. We were told to expect miracles, that God would provide for his chosen army. The only miracle I have witnessed is a man's ability to survive on boiled leather and bitter herbs for a month. We sought divine intervention, a sign of his favor. We received only dysentery, a far more intimate and immediate sign from our own beleaguered bodies. We called upon God in our moments of deepest despair, our voices raw with prayer. We heard nothing in return but the howling of the Anatolian wind and the relentless, gnawing sound of our own empty guts. It is a lonely sermon, the one preached by starvation. If this desperate transmission from the past, this ghost of a voice from a forgotten age of misplaced faith, has given you a moment of grim amusement, then I am glad. If our suffering has provided you with a profound appreciation for your own era's relative lack of plague and constant grinding starvation, then my work here is done. Perhaps that is the purpose of this strange connection through time. We are a cautionary tale. We are a historical document written in blood, sweat, and regret. We are the grim reminder that even the holiest of intentions can lead to the most profane of realities. So, what is the lesson in all of this? I am not yet sure. We are still in the middle of the story and the ink is not yet dry. But I implore you, from 1,000 years away, do not let our story be forgotten or sanitized. Keep listening to the uncomfortable truths. Keep questioning the glorious lies that will inevitably be sung about us, and for the love of all that is holy and all that is surprisingly and consistently unhelpful, keep that subscribe button pressed. Your act of witness is the only thing that gives this suffering any meaning beyond our own misery. Think of your subscription as an act of remembrance for every man who died anonymously in a ditch. Think of it as a prayer for the souls of those of us who are losing our own, because we're still out here, somewhere in the heart of this forsaken land. We are still marching, still starving, and still occasionally, in the darkest hours of the night, wondering if heaven's cartographers made a terrible mistake and sent us to the wrong address entirely. This holy war feels suspiciously like a postal error of biblical proportions. Until the next broadcast, if there is one, the road to Antioch is long, and my health, like the army's morale, is a dwindling resource. But I will try to keep this channel open. I will try to keep speaking the truth as long as I have breath to speak it. From the heart of the First Crusade, this is Brother Thaddeus, signing off. May your bread always be fresh and your water always be clean. You do not know how lucky you are.